Well, good morning. My name's Robert Johnston, and we're now at Ashley Gorge Station. Ashley Gorge Station is about 1,650 hectares, most of which is hill country. There's 3,000 acres in front of me that goes back halfway into Lees Valley, which is hill country, and behind me are the flats. There's about 500 hectares of flats down here. Now, my grandmother came here in 1923, and my father farmed the property until 1970, and on his death I assumed the ownership and running of the property. With me today is young Harry. He's the fourth generation. He's 6, so who knows what his future will be. But this, I remember Father describing it once as a treeless tract of windswept country, and he was quite right. When he came here, it was all tussock and brown top and sweet vernal and a bit of gorse, no trees, and he planted what he could afford in the 30s and 40s, and of course there wasn't much money around then in the slump and depression times and then the war years. But in 1950, the catchment boards were formed, and we could get tree planting subsidies, particularly for soil erosion purposes at the mouth of these gorges. So he undertook quite a tree planting program annually, and over the next 20 years, between 1950 and when he died in 1970, he'd established quite a network of shelter belts down there of varying species and various mixes of species. We were fortunate geographically to have some of the fencing on the property aligned in a north-south aspect, and that if you are fortunate enough to have a north-south aspect, that provides you with an ideal base groundwork to which to establish your shelter. And we had the slower growing species. Father was actually quite a pioneer in the mix of species. So we had the slower growing species on the windward and 2 rows of radiata on the lee. Now that was subsequently refined a little by others, principally Peter Smale, but the concept was there. And the north-south aspect gave you both shelter from the northwest wind and the southwest wind and storms, all in the one shelter belt. And the other key point was that the land on either side got equally morning sun and afternoon sun, so none of it ever got frozen. Yeah, well, we're now upstairs in the accommodation unit, a little granny flat that we built above the new double garage, and every item of timber in this building was grown and milled on the property, and it evolved really, because as it evolved, I could see that it had potential to use more and more of the timbers that we had actually grown here and had milled and had stored. So we've got the framework of this building is our own 60-year-old radiata. The flooring here that we're on is tongue and groove larch, which is drilled and plugged. The 3,500 plugs went into covering up the screws. So it's drilled, screwed and plugged. There's a bed over in that corner which I made out of, strangely enough, poplar, black poplar, which was milled. And the hallway, the entrance hallway, is a variety of timbers, all of which came from the property. And behind me here you'll see a shot of the hill country. As I explained before, there's about 3,000 acres of hill country up there, and on which we principally run sheep. We've got very little cattle up there, and the reason for that is to preserve the tussock cover. But I've also got 3 production forestry blocks of radiata, of about 13 hectares in total only. They're just 3 small woodlots, and they've done quite well. But also in the very early 80s, 1982 and 83, I established 2 QE2 Trust covenants. There's a block of tussock straight behind me here called the Gorge Hill, and I think that's number 41 QE2 Trust covenant, and tucked out of sight is a 500 acre block of Nothofagus beech and broadleaf forest, and that's got quite a spectacular old giant matai of magnificent proportions, which we believe to be probably 1,000 years old at least, or so some of the forestry experts tell us. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to include that in the QE2 Trust, was to preserve that old forest giant. But we've also got some kakatea coming through, a lot of kanuka, manuka and other indigenous forest that's and scrub that is regenerating. But it's all got its place. We've got to have our tussock for our production, and we can have some production forestry, and we can have some indigenous vegetation as well for aesthetics. Now, you could argue that on these flats today, the land is perhaps too valuable to be planted in trees. Well, yes, you could run that argument. I'd also run another argument that life's not all about making money, but it's providing shelter for the soil and shelter for your livestock. So as well as providing an end crop product that's potentially very valuable. Now, we got well paid for the radiata that we did take out of here, and I hope that in the future, whoever owns this block of land in 35 years' time, when these are milled at age 40, that's the plan, we'll get a very good return from a well-tended woodlot of sequoia. We established, or my father before me and I've carried on from him, established these shelter systems on these flats for good reason, and it's quite sad that land use change has taken place, where on the one hand you've got the progressive nature of dairy farming, which by its very nature, and the irrigation that goes with it, by its very nature means that a lot of these shelter systems have got to be removed. And I think it's to great credit to those dairy farmers who are actually adapting to the change. They've perhaps removed a lot of trees, and there are lots of trees that have come out to make room for pivots, but a lot of those really progressive dairy farmers are re-establishing different species and different aspects on those dairy farms. The shelter belt behind me here, half of which is the original, established in the 1950s, and you can see it's got quite a lot of porosity attached to it, and that's pretty important. You don't want a dense block of wall of trees at that height, or the wind will actually blow them over. But if they're quite porous, the wind will go through them. This block up here behind me, there's 4 or 5 acres of scrub up there, which has saved our bacon, so to speak, on 3 occasions in snowstorms. We've had shorn sheep up there, and when the southerly comes, the southerly will actually drive them into shelter, into a microclimate. So it's quite valuable. I've been an intermittent member of the Farm Forestry Association. I first joined when my father was the local president in the 1960s, and then I got involved with other things, wool industry and local government and things, so I haven't been as active in the organisation as I should have been. But the benefits of the Farm Forestry Associations to the farming community are enormous. They provide encouragement and assistance and advice, and the field days that they organise are invaluable, where you can go and see people's successes. And one thing about farm foresters is that they're never ashamed to actually show you their disappointments. And I've got a few disappointments here, and I've made a lot of mistakes, but we never stop learning, and I think we never stop achieving. And the wonderful thing about it is that it provides just another source of income, and you don't have to cut them out on a particular year. You can actually delay it until the market forces move in your favour, and that's important. I don't have an annual logging program, but I try and plan it so you can take advantage of the price movements when they're at their best. And to be able to establish some woodlots, they're all a valuable feature for your own retirement planning and succession planning going forward into the next generation. And I've benefited enormously and the property's benefited from the foresight and plantings that my father did, and I hope that the family that will follow me will benefit from the plantings that I've managed to undertake and provide for the future.